What's up again, everyone? Welcome to this episode of the Moderate Podcast for Saturday, April 17th, 2021. Glad to have you aboard this week. And we have a lot to get to on the program this week, so we're going to go ahead and get into it. I do have one item of note, just very briefly. We have established a survey for the show, a very short survey. Should only take you a couple of minutes to complete. I know I've been asking you guys to do a lot, and believe me, I appreciate you first taking the time just to even listen to the program. And, you know, more and more people are picking up the show, and it's really much appreciated. And I know I'm asking the listeners to do a lot, but it really is so that we understand so I understand how I'm doing and how you're enjoying the show, what you like about it, what you don't like about it. You know, is it too long, not long enough? You know, should we keep producing shows every week? Things like that. You know, we want to know what our audience looks like, so that we can cater better to the audience. And so, in that vein, we do have a survey on the website. So visit our website, themoderatepodcast.com. If you visit on the desktop, you'll see a link on the right side that says survey. Just click on that. It'll take you to the survey. Just fill it out. If you are visiting the website on a mobile device, you'll probably have to scroll down the most recent episodes. So there's probably about 10 or so episodes listed, and then you'll see the links for various pages. You know, you'll see an about page, a link to our merch store, and you'll also see the link to our survey. So please check that out at our website. And as always, please make sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast catcher. Podchaser is still running their promotion through the end of the month that if you leave a review, they will donate 25 cents to Meals on Wheels. And if I respond to those, they will double it to 50 cents. So again, for a very worthy cause, please check that out. A couple of anecdotes to kind of get started before we get into the more serious stuff. And not to say that this first particular story is not serious, but I think that it is something that it's all about context, right? One of the central themes of this program is always context. And we try to put things into context as much as possible. Because a lot of times commentators, in order to get you to believe them or to get you to believe a particular viewpoint, often will leave context out. And that happens on the left and on the right. So that's why my intention is always, to keep context in the conversation. So anti-vaxxers, they've always been crazy, and now with the COVID vaccines out there, they've gone to a whole other level. I've always maintained that the vaccines should be voluntary. And the reason for that is because if you want to put yourself at risk to get sick, then you can do that. A lot of times when we think about vaccines, the only downfall of that, like when you have schools, for example, so when you get certain vaccines that you have to have in order to attend public schools, that's always been a big argument from anti-vaxxers. And it's because there are kids that cannot take vaccines because they're immunocompromised. So, you know, you're taking them not just for yourself, but for those other people. And so vaccines have never been just about the person. Now, in some cases they are, if they're not necessarily, well, actually, you know, take that back. If a disease is contagious, that's why you do vaccines, so you stop the spread of it, right? So vaccines have stopped polio, they've stopped the measles, they've stopped smallpox. There's been a bunch of advancements that have been made that have allowed us to live longer. And a lot of those times, those bumps in age expectancy are related to vaccines. So, you know, obviously you can tell where my stance is on vaccines. But the news about Johnson & Johnson, anti-vaxxers are the people, at least that are against this COVID one, and they think that people are stupid for taking it. They actually will post on Facebook constantly about how dumb people are for taking it. Now they're saying, "Oh my God, you must feel really stupid now because look what happened with the Johnson and Johnson. They actually stopped using it." And this is their aha moment, their "I told you so" moment. I hate to, and I don't want to be like somebody that said "I told you so," but I told you so. But we're talking about half a dozen cases, 6 cases that involve blood clots, out of 6.8 million doses administered. 6 out of 6 million. And the people that are claiming that they were right and that this vindicates them are often the same people that said we should not be afraid of a virus because it only has a 0.1% death rate. So stay with me here, folks. They think that the virus, the vaccine for the virus is too dangerous because of what's happened with Johnson and Johnson. But you shouldn't be afraid of the virus of the virus itself because it only has a 0.1% death rate. That means you have a 99.9% chance of surviving, right? If you get it, right? One thing that you have to then keep in mind, 6 out of 6.8 million doses means that the incidence of this was 0.00088%. Let me say that again. 0.00088%. And this is what they're claiming victory over. But don't be afraid of the virus because it only 0.1% of the time it'll kill you. This is the logic, folks. This is what we are dealing with. Now again, if you have your own opinion on the vaccine, that's fine. But don't cast dispersions on people that do take it then. And people that do take it, don't cast dispersions on people that are skeptical. That's all I'm saying. Let's just get along here. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't, well, that's up to you. That's up to you. More whining from Donald Trump. And it has to do with a case we're going to talk about later, but it also has to do with the going back to the election. And so I want to read this now to kind of prime the pump for our subject later, which is Biden's Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court. And I want to read this because this is just more of Trump whining. It's great. Statement by Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States of America, from April 12th, 2021. That would be this past Monday. Wouldn't it be ironic if the Supreme Court of the United States, after showing that they didn't have the courage to do what they should have done on the great presidential election fraud of 2020, was packed by the same people, the radical left Democrats, they are so afraid of, that they so pathetically defended in not hearing the election fraud case? Now, there is a very good chance they will be diluted and moved throughout the court system so that they can see how the lower courts work, with many new justices added to the court, far more than has been reported. There is also a good chance that they will be term limited. We had 19 states go before the Supreme Court who were shockingly not allowed to be heard. Believe it or not, the President of the United States was not allowed to be heard based on no standing, not based on the facts. Facts in all capital, by the way. The court wouldn't rule on the merits of the great election fraud, including the fact that local politicians and judges, not state legislatures, made major changes to the election, which is in the total violation of the United States Constitution. Our politically correct Supreme Court will get what they deserve, an unconstitutionally elected group of radical left Democrats who are destroying our country. With leaders like Mitch McConnell, they are helpless to fight. He didn't fight for the presidency, and he won't fight for the court. If and when this happens, I hope the justices remember the day they didn't have courage to do what they should have done for America. So if I had a, I mean, this is pretty pathetic, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's pretty sad that this guy is still railing on this, and you can tell that he wrote this himself. But yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of Trump whining. Now, conservatives got into a little bit of a tizzy this week over something that Pete Buttigieg said. He's the Secretary of Transportation. There is racism physically built into some of our highways. That is his quote. So Madison Cawthorn, who is a 25-year-old, he is the youngest congressman currently. I believe he's from North Carolina. According to Democrats, highways, in all caps, are now racist, also in all caps. You heard it, folks. The roads we drive on are racist. If past generations could see the utter nonsense we deal with today, they'd be in disbelief. Young America's Foundation showed a picture of Pete Buttigieg with his quote and said, "This is not parody." Here is an article from the RF Angle. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg said in an interview this week that racism was physically built in the U.S. highways. Speaking to April Ryan, Buttigieg said that the highways were intentionally placed in minority neighborhoods. There's racism physically built into some of our highways, and that's why the jobs plan has specifically committed to reconnect some of the communities that were divided by these dollars. Buttigieg went as far as claiming that the highways were designed to racially divide cities. Well, if you're in Washington, I'm told that the history of that highway is one of that was built at the expense of communities of colors in the D.C. area. There are stories, and I think Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and in New York, Robert Moses famously saw through the construction of a lot of highways. So conservatives obviously are making fun of this. They're mocking it. But let me ask you this. Have you heard of the phrase, that person grew up on the wrong side of the tracks? Right? And that is a true statement, actually. Especially right before the 70s revolt on the highways. Even before that happened, where a lot of freeway construction was canceled altogether, partially because of where highways were going to be built. Highways were a lot of times, like I've done a special on the Southern California freeway system, and rich white neighborhoods, Beverly Hills was one famous example, lobbied and successfully lobbied to have freeways completely canceled through their area. Other places, there were freeways rerouted through poor minority neighborhoods, mostly black neighborhoods. And Syracuse, New York, is is one famous example of where minorities had their community split in half as a result of freeway construction. It's just too many times that this was coincidental, and you got to remember. You have to remember when the freeways were built. The freeways, in a lot of instances, were built in this country at a time before the civil rights movement. And so racism was a prevalent thing. So the fact that railroads before them and then roads in later years were used to, They said, well, what's the path of least resistance? The path of least resistance is put it through a minority neighborhood where there's mostly minorities because it doesn't affect the people in power. So it is absolutely true that the freeways in this country and the railroads before that were built to divide neighborhoods, and they were disproportionately built through minority neighborhoods. Now, again, today, we talk about systemic racism, and I think people agree. Most people will agree that racism was a problem in this country in the 50s and 60s and before, and that has slowly gotten better over time, right? I think most people would agree with that. Well, and that's what I'm saying is that you think about the time period when most of our freeways were originally built. They were built at a time where segregation was a thing, separate but equal was a thing, and racism was prominent. So that's not, I mean, people should not be shocked by that. Now, I will say the people that are making these statements are all in their 20s. And so maybe they haven't read history. I mean, the history of infrastructure is really not taught much in our country, right? I mean, that's not something that people know a lot of. I mean, history is, not taught a lot in general, probably not nearly enough, but especially that aspect of it. So, the mocking of Pete Buttigieg is ridiculous, and there is absolute truth to what he said, and it was purposely done in a lot of cases. Mostly, I mean, not just they didn't build a road simply just to spite minority neighborhoods. They needed to build these roads. So, but they picked those areas because they knew that, and it's like, oh, who cares? We're dividing up a black neighborhood. Who gives a crap if we have to displace some black people? No one cares. No one cares about them. That was the attitude back then. And that's the point. That's the point that Buttigieg is making. And we talked about that one story in Houston, and it's not a surprise that this is the approach that the Biden administration is going to take to infrastructure building. Now, I don't know how they're going to solve this. Are they going to remove freeways? Are they going to add underpasses that connect neighborhoods? I don't know how they're exactly going to accomplish what they're talking about, but it will remain to be seen. But if you're improving infrastructure, you don't do it by taking it away. And relocating it would be almost impossible to do. It would be infinitesimally expensive, and you're going to have to divide up another neighborhood. So is this going to be about reparations and going and say, okay, well, now we're going to go run it through a primarily white neighborhood instead? I don't know. How do you do that? So it's a complicated question as to how you fix that now, because it's there. And relocating freeways at this point is impossible. Tearing them down is not practical. So what do you do? What do you do? That's the question, is how do you solve that? That I don't know. And I don't know if their answers are any good. So anyway, I just wanted to address that, because now we're going to talk about the Duante Wright shooting. So we've had another black person killed by police. And I will put a caveat on that, because here's the thing. I understand that this is something that has happened before, but I want to go through what happened, and I want to put things, again, in proper context. And I think that just like everything, everyone that has an impassioned opinion about what happened is doing it from a very biased standpoint. And once again, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Okay. So this happened on April 11th. So what? That was last Sunday. Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. Police pulled over Duante Wright and his girlfriend. So officers said they pulled them over due to the car's expired registration tag in the presence of an object hanging from the car's rearview mirror. That doesn't make much. That second part doesn't make much sense. I mean, what if it's a freaking air conditioner? Are you not allowed to have? Do they outlaw air fresheners? By the way, I don't know. Anyway, officers ran Wright's name through a police database and learned that he had open arrest warrant after failing to appear in court on charges that he fled from officers and possessed a gun without a permit during an encounter with Minneapolis police in June. Based on that information, police attempted to arrest him. So He had an arrest warrant. So what do you do? What is it if a police officer finds somebody that has an arrest warrant? What are they supposed to do? Just say, well, I'm going to ignore it this time. I'm just going to let you go this time. No. If you have an arrest warrant out, standard procedure is you arrest the person. Okay? The other thing is that the reason that he was not allowed to have a permit to carry a gun was because he was, let's see. Let me see if I can find the part where, because you have to remember that there's always more to the story, right? So, I can't even find it in here. I mean, this is where it gets ridiculous because obviously he was he had another rap sheet. I mean, he was arrested before for trying to flee from from being arrested for assault charges and for attempting to rob a woman. Okay. So you have to remember that too. That was something that the media failed to put in there. And I think it was actually in this article I was reading, and I think it was removed. I want to say that it was removed. I mean, I'm not seeing it here now. And I have to imagine that, oh my gosh, I think it was removed from Wikipedia. That's ridiculous. But anyway, I digress. So he's pulled over. I viewed the body cam footage, and so he's being arrested. He's being handcuffed as Officer Kimberly Potter walks up. She's a 48-year-old police officer with the Brooklyn Center Police Department. She was actually an FTO, a field training officer. And then as soon as she walks up and starts to assist, he starts to resist arrest. He tries to get back in the car and flee. And he got back behind the wheel of the vehicle. Potter, who when the incident started, had her taser holstered on her left side and her gun on her right, said, "I'll tase you," and then yelled, "Taser, taser, taser." Instead of the taser, Potter then discharged her Glock 9mm handgun a single time using her right hand and subsequently said, "Oh shit, I just shot him." Potter was holding the gun for at least 7 seconds before discharging, and that's true. You see her holding the gun, and she says, "I will tase you," and she says, "Taser, taser, taser," and then she shoots him. So after being shot, Wright drove off. After driving about 470 feet, collided with another vehicle near the intersection of 63rd and North and Catherine Drive, which is the next street over. Officers administered CPR, but Wright was pronounced dead at the scene at 2:18 p.m., which was approximately 25 minutes after the incident started. Wright's girlfriend was hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries, and no one in the other vehicle was injured. So, obviously, this brought on a response the next day. The police chief held a press conference and played a clip of the body cam footage. According to him, Potter intended to use a taser on Wright, but pulled out and discharged her gun instead. Obviously, she said taser, taser, taser. The next day, on Tuesday, both the officer and the police chief submitted their resignations, with Potter's resignation effective immediately. Obviously, this is going to spur an investigation, and then on this past Wednesday, Potter was charged with second-degree manslaughter. For violation of statute section 609.205, a felony offense entailing culpable negligence creating unreasonable risk that carries a maximum penalty of 10 years incarceration and or $20,000 fine. The criminal complaint against Potter states that she caused Wright's death by her culpable negligence, whereby she created an unreasonable risk and consciously took a chance of causing death or great bodily harm to Wright. That may be hard to prove because, again, I think at the end of the day, she did not mean to shoot this guy. And I can tell you right now that, this has obviously created an uproar, and the police chief stated he was out there at the riots, and then the reporters tried to say there wasn't a riot, and there's BS, there was. So the media, the way they were questioning the city manager and the police chief and the mayor was pretty ridiculous. And they were, it didn't sound like real reporting. It sounded like commentators trying to ask questions, not actual reporters just trying to look for the facts. They were judge and jury in that situation. So I think the way that they were treated was not fair. But people are angry over this because it's another black man dead. This one is obviously not in the same vein as Derek Chauvin, not even close. It's unfortunate that it happened in Minnesota, in the suburbs of Minneapolis, for that community, because they've already gone through a lot, and now this happens. Obviously, a huge tragedy. But I can guarantee you that probably nobody feels worse about this than Kimberly Potter. Believe it or not, most officers, the vast majority of police officers, are good people. They are human beings just like we are. If you want to take the human emotion part out of it, you're going to have to employ robots. That's the only way that's going to happen. And this will continue to happen as long as you have human police officers, because humans make mistakes. And this was a mistake. Derek Chauvin was not a mistake, and he should be punished to the full extent of the law. And he makes officers look bad. Then you had that other guy in Pennsylvania, the military officer that was harassed by police. That was absolutely ridiculous. And, I was talking to the police chief of where I work, and, he is pissed because he's like, God, these knuckleheads are making us all look bad. I mean, these guys need to get, and he noted that it tends to happen outside of California because the training in California that officers get is much, much better. And you see far fewer incidents in California than you do in other places, even though you would expect to see more here just because of our population. But yet you see it happen less here. In the city I work at, I've been there almost 7 years, and I've only seen, I think I could probably count the number of times an officer-involved shooting has happened on one hand. And I can tell you every single time they put them on administrative leave, not just because there's an assumption of guilt. That's not what they put them on leave for. It's mostly because of mental health. Because if you shoot somebody and you have to, if you're in that situation where you have to shoot someone, number one, you were probably fearing for your life unless you made a mistake like Kimberly Potter did. But usually, these guys are devastated. These men and women are devastated when they have to shoot somebody, even if it's not fatal. And and people don't realize that. People don't think about that. People don't see them as human beings. They see them as monsters. They see them as control freaks, and then they have to deal with people all the time calling them pigs and calling them names and giving them a hard time. The police don't show up when good things are happening. They only show up when bad things are happening. So there's going to be their disproportionate share of times where they're going to be involved in incidents like this because that's their job. Their job is to report to times that crimes are being committed or violence is being committed on somebody, and they need to go and break it up. So, of course, that's going to be the case. But this attack on the police force as a result of this is definitely negligence. But again, it's an accident. It could have just as easily been a white person. As a matter of fact, I don't know if there would have been outrage had this been a white person. If a white police officer shoots a white suspect, and it was an accident, and it's clear that it's an accident, then then this would not be a national story. It would barely be a local story, probably. It'd probably get a blurb in the newspaper, and that's about it. It wouldn't even be covered. This is getting international coverage because of the race of the suspect. But again, people point out, if he had not resisted, if he had not attempted to get back in his car, he would have been living. And wouldn't you, and especially right now, because of all the civil rights stuff happening right now, you will be able to get a good attorney to help you in your day in court. Because once you start resisting arrest, you will run the risk of the officer becoming judge and jury because of the use of lethal force. You run that risk by doing that. Why can't you just allow the rest to happen and get your day in court? If you haven't done anything wrong, then hopefully the court system won't fail you. But even if it does, he'd still be alive. And people would be able to get justice for him because he'd be alive to get justice. Are there people wrongly convicted? Yeah. It doesn't happen very often, though. That's why when it does happen, it's such big news. So I saw this post by a relative of mine. He said that, I just saw this on Fox News. It shows how distorted the left-wing news media has become. And it shows two screenshots, both from Fox News. First, a post from the New York Post, or a quote from the New York Post, which is also owned by the same company as Fox News. This is from Miranda Devine. By swallowing the false narrative of systemic racism, we have demonized and criminalized police while turning criminals into civil rights martyrs. Then the second graphic talks about 2021 fatal police shootings. There have been 52 black suspects or black people killed by police in 2021, 3 of which were unarmed. Contrast that to 109 white people and 5 were unarmed. Now, on the surface, you're like, well, look at that. That's not systemic racism because it's twice as many white people. There's only one little problem with that. The fact that it's disproportionate. This is where Fox News is manipulating its audience. And it's funny that my family member here says that it's how distorted the left-wing news media has become, and he immediately posts 2 screenshots that are absolutely manipulating that's the right-wing media manipulating their audience. Because you can't argue that there is not systemic racism. In that, I just think it's the wrong term. We've talked about this before on the show. It's not the right term for the thing. When people think of racism, that's the problem with semantics, right? When people think of racism, they think of, people calling other people the N-word and also, or discriminating against them. People that are I won't hire a black person, or I won't hire women, or I won't hire gays, or whatever. I don't want to serve gays. Whatever the case may be. Bigotry, right? That's what they see. That's what they think racism is. And in that sense, racism is far less of an issue than it has been in the past, right? People cringe. Most people cringe when they hear somebody calling a white person calling a black person the N-word. It's not acceptable. Society has shunned those that treat people like that. And they don't have a high, most of society does not have a high opinion of people that are like that. Okay? But what I equate it to is the fact that when and this is a whole explanation, but basically in a nutshell, I think I've explained this before, but it sounds like it bears repeating. When we start, let's say 1789 is the starting point where everyone starts equal. All right. Well, there are very few rags to riches stories in our nation, right? I think the immigration story of my family is actually one of those, to be honest with you. Not that we're rich by any means, but we are obviously we're able to carve out success in our lives and live a very comfortable middle class life, okay? Through very, very hard work of my grandfather and my parents, and my grandmother as well. So, that is something that they worked on and had to have a lot of discipline to get to where they were, okay? But for the most part, people are either a beneficiary or a victim of their circumstances in which they are born into, right? So if you're born rich, you likely will remain rich, right? You have that opportunity. And you get opportunities that other people don't. And it doesn't matter, by the way, what race you are. If you're born into a rich family, you're going to do, you're statistically speaking, you're going to do better. If you're born into a poor family, statistically speaking, you're not going to do as well. You're probably going to remain poor. Okay? That's just, that has been the case throughout human history. Now, the United States is a place where more people can go from rags to riches than probably any other society that's ever existed. And that is what is the great and unique thing about this country. But it's still a small number. So instead of maybe 1% of that happening in other places, maybe 2 or 3% here, which is significantly higher, but it's still a small number in the grand scheme of things, right? So the fact that we started this society and whites had advantages and blacks had nothing. They were not allowed to have anything. They couldn't do anything for the first, 80 years of our country, right? Civil War happens. Slaves are freed. Okay, great. Now you have freedom. We were supposed to give them some restitution for all that free labor they gave us, 40 acres and a mule, remember? Which actually didn't end up happening. It happened in very few circumstances. Then you go for the next 100 years where blacks are free, quote unquote, but they're still allowed to be discriminated against, okay? They are not allowed to vote, or at least they're allowed to vote, but they're intimidated into not voting. Then you have Jim Crow laws, and then you have separate but equal and all this stuff, right? So that happens for another 100 years. And meanwhile, whites are getting, if it's a relay race, let's say, and you're passing the baton from generation to generation, right? Then all of a sudden in 1964, okay, you cannot treat black people any differently anymore. Okay, the first 80 years they weren't even allowed to run the race. Then when they started to be able to run the race, they were handicapped for 100 years, and now they're finally able to fully run the race just like anybody else. The problem is they started, if it's a 400-meter race, they've started 200 meters behind, right? Because they haven't been able to build their own wealth and do their own thing without either being able to participate at all. And then when they did, they were had to run the race with weights on their ankles or something, however you want to say the analogy, right? And then one day we said, okay, you don't have any more of those handicaps. You can run the race just like we do. But the problem is the white people were way down the track. And then we expect them to say, okay, well, now you can compete just with us. Good luck. Have at it. That's what systemic racism is. Because it's like, well, wait a minute. You had this 180 years head start in our society. And now you expect us to just run equal to you? That's why the poverty rates, the income rates have not changed between whites and blacks. They've grown at the same pace, but whites are still higher than blacks. They haven't caught up. And it's because they're born into disproportionately poor neighborhoods. And why is that? Because of generations from the past. We are a victim or a beneficiary of the circumstances we are born into. And more black people were born into poverty than their white counterparts, partially because of what happened in the past. And overcoming that is difficult for anybody. For anybody, it's difficult. But if there's a greater proportion of them in that, guess what? They're going to continue to have a greater proportion of them in poverty. That is what systemic racism is. Okay? That's what people aren't understanding. So I hope that made sense. I hope that's what, people understand what I'm trying to say here. But having said that, I will make this one last point. So the right is completely dismissing this idea when it's clearly an issue because it's something there's still things we haven't fixed from the past. I don't think it's reparations. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you, which would be completely unfair to the people today that didn't necessarily maybe benefited because of they were born into a better circumstances as a result, but it still was not any fault of their own necessarily. They were born they were born into these circumstances. They didn't control how they got there, right? So how do you punish people that didn't have any control over that? That's one aspect of it. But the right completely dismisses this idea. They have at a point with don't resist arrest. Unquestioning, that needs to happen in any circumstance. The police arrest you. If you didn't do anything wrong, wait for your day in court. Don't let the officer be judge, jury, and executioner. And you run that risk if you resist arrest or resist the officers. If you think that they're a bunch of pigs and they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, that's neither here nor there. That's how we're set up. Use the court system. Get a good lawyer, use the court system. And if you've been wronged, you'll find a good lawyer. Trust me. There are plenty of lawyers that are going to want to make their case and get famous because they got somebody that had injustice against them. Okay? But the left also needs to cool their jets with, you would think that racism is worse now than it was when there was slavery, the way that they carry on about this stuff. That's not going to solve anything either. That's the problem. We're on two extreme sides. One side doesn't recognize any problems whatsoever, and they think everything's fine. The other side thinks the sky is falling, and everything is just going to crap. Guess what? It's more complicated than that. It's way more complicated than that. Reforming the police is not going to fix the problem. And ignoring the disparity between blacks and whites and just simply telling black people you just need to work harder is not going to solve the problem either. Because that's a BS answer. Neither side wants to fix the problem. I said that in episode 79, and I still say it today. Nobody wants to fix the damn problem, and that is the issue. That is their damn issue right now. All right, when we come back, speaking of trying to fix a problem, maybe trying to it's a solution in search of a problem. I think it more sounds like rather than a problem in search of a solution. We're going to talk about the Biden's presidential commission on the Supreme Court and some other proposals related to that. So we're going to talk about that when we return.
You're listening to the Moderate Podcast on Anchor.fm.
Do you experience digital eye strain from too much blue light exposure from digital screens? Baxter Blue glasses are not your average frames. These blue light lenses filter 80% of the highest energy blue light, eliminating 99% of glare. The past year, we have all been glued to our devices more than ever with all of these online meetings that we would normally be face-to-face. Our exposure to digital light has soared, and our eyes and our sleep have suffered as a result. I actually started using blue light filter glasses shortly after the initial shutdown started, and they have made a world of difference for me. Before using them, I would get headaches as the day wore on, and all the straining on my eyes were doing, but that went away once I started using blue light filters. Baxter Blue is also a force for good and provides a pair of reading glasses for someone in need for every pair sold. This is eyewear built for our digital age, and Baxter Blue is giving our listeners 10% off your next purchase of blue light, sleep, or kids glasses. Click the link in our show notes for your exclusive discount. This is the sign you've been waiting for to invest in blue light glasses. We know you will love your Baxters, and we know that you will feel the difference. Welcome back to the Moderate Podcast, powered by Podbean. Welcome. Glad to have you with us this week. And so let's talk about the Supreme Court. This has been an issue that's come up quite a bit over the last, it was definitely a big issue over the election. And a lot of progressive candidates in the Democratic primary were supportive of increasing the number in the Supreme Court. And that was even before Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And so they were already pushing for that because at that point, the conservatives still had a 5-4 majority, which goes to show that this has always been about politics from day one. Now, Joe Biden was noncommittal at best in that, at worst, for progressives anyway, is that he had no interest in changing the composition of the Supreme Court. So this is where one area where Joe Biden is going to clash with the more liberal members of his party. So let's read, first of all, the actual executive order that was issued last Friday, April 9th. And I want to focus on Section 3 of the of this executive order that establishes the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. Section 3 is called Functions. Subsection A, the commission shall produce a report for the president that includes the following. 1, an account of the contemporary commentary and debate about the role and operation of the Supreme Court in our constitutional system and about the functioning of the constitutional process by which the president nominates and, by and with the advice of the consent of the Senate, appoints justices to the Supreme Court. 2, the historical background of other periods in the nation's history when the Supreme Court's role and the nominations and advice and consent process were subject to critical assessment and prompted proposals for reform. And 3, an analysis of the principal arguments in the contemporary public debate for and against Supreme Court reform, including an appraisal of the merits and legality of particular reform proposals. Section B says the commission shall solicit public comment, including other expert views, to ensure that its work is informed by a broad spectrum of ideas. And finally, subsection C, the commission shall submit its report to the president within 180 days of the date of the commission's first public meeting. And so this will, they will, let's see, I don't know how many people will be on here, but I think it's 36. So the commission shall be composed of not more than 36 members appointed by the president. So this is a 36-member committee. It has former judges, it has constitutional scholars, and others having experience with and knowledge of the federal judiciary and the Supreme Court of the United States. And it does have both liberals, progressives, and conservatives on this committee, which is, by the way, driving liberals nuts. That is driving them crazy, the fact that there are conservatives on this thing. And that just goes to show that that people just don't care anymore. They think the other side is absolutely vile and evil. This is where we are in our country right now. It's ridiculous. The press release that accompanied this says the commission's purpose is to provide an analysis of the principal arguments in the contemporary public debate for and against Supreme Court reform, including an appraisal of the merits and legality of particular reform proposals. So it doesn't say this in the actual order, but it does say in the press release, the topics it will examine include the genesis of the reform debate, the court's role in the constitutional system, the length of service and turnover of justices on the Supreme Court, the membership and size of the court, and the court's case selection rules and practices. And obviously the one that people are zeroing in on is the membership and size of the court piece of this. So number one, it's focusing on more than just packing the court. Okay. And in that vein, this past Thursday, here's this article. Liberal congressional Democrats unveiled a proposal Thursday to expand the number of seats of the U.S. Supreme Court from 9 to 13, a move Republicans have blasted as court packing and has almost no chance of being voted on after Speaker Pelosi has said she has no plans to bring it to the floor. The measure, the Judiciary Act of 2021, is co-sponsored by Representatives Jerry Nadler, Hank Johnson, Mondaire Jones, and Ed Markey. At issue is the make of the Supreme Court, where conservatives now have a 6-3 majority. Democrats and liberal activists say this ensures that the High Court will strike down almost any legal challenge to the Biden administration's legislative priorities. And so this view telegraphs how they see the court. They try to argue that they have this view of the impartial judicial branch, but yet they are completely viewing this from a political standpoint. It's 100% political. And so they want to put people on the court that agree with them. But that doesn't mean they're impartial. Just because they agree with you, they're not impartial. And that's exactly what you want to do. So you have 6 conservatives, so you want to have 7 liberals. That's all this is about. The bill to expand the size of the Supreme Court is hardly a surprise, given that it's the only mechanism to change the court's composition without a constitutional amendment. Congress has changed the number of justices 7 times in the course of U.S. history, but the last time was immediately after the Civil War. We're going to go through that history in just a second. Some scholars argue that Congress could also pass legislation limiting the number of years a justice could serve. Most proposals are for 15 or 18-year terms. But the Constitution says that Supreme Court justices and other federal judges, quote, shall hold their office during good behavior, and that has long been interpreted to mean they cannot be removed except by impeachment by the House and conviction by the Senate. Changing that would seem to require a constitutional amendment. So this is what Ed Markey had to say at the news conference. We are here today because the United States Supreme Court is broken. It is out of balance, and it needs to be fixed. Too many Americans view our highest court in the land as a partisan political institution, not our impartial judicial branch of government. Too many Americans have lost faith in the court as a neutral arbiter of the most important constitutional and legal questions that arise in our judicial system, and I'm disappointed to say too many Americans question the court's legitimacy. Now, meanwhile, Republicans are scathing in their response to the measure. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky accused Democrats of, quote, threatening judicial independence from the steps of the court, end of quote. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas tweeted that the move would, quote, destroy the court. I don't know if necessarily think that would happen, but what it does is it sets up political theater. Now, they are upset because the court doesn't interpret laws the way they want them to. And now they have this power to do something about it, and they want to reestablish the balance, which means we want it to favor us. That's what that's code for. Okay? And as far as limiting the number of years a justice could serve, when they say they shall hold their offices during good behavior, Federalist number 78 even goes further and talks about what that means. And Alexander Hamilton argued that in order for the judiciary to be completely impartial, you do need to appoint them for life. There is, and that's why you do have the mechanism to remove them by impeachment. And judges have been impeached and removed before. So it is possible to have that happen, and that's the only way you can get a judge out, other than either they die or they retire. They voluntarily give up the position. And so it seems pretty clear that that'd be the interpretation. But my question would be, who would decide that? Because can the Supreme Court decide on the constitutionality of a law that affects the actual members that are sitting? Who would decide that? Who would make the decision on the Supreme Court when the very body that is in question on this for this law is being challenged? Who would be the arbiter of that? It can't be the legislature. It certainly can't be I guess maybe the executive branch. Like, how do you solve an issue between the legislature and the executive branch? But the executive branch, the only way that would become law is if the executive branch signed it, so they wouldn't be partial. So nobody's partial in this. Who would actually answer that question? If anybody has any ideas, please email me, host@themoderpodcast.com. I really like to know who would decide that. I think it's obviously unprecedented. None of the other judicial acts that have passed in the past have been challenged, so it's not something that's ever been tested before. So what is Article 3? Let's look at the history of the Supreme Court real quick and a bit of the federal court system. What does Article 3 say? So Section 1 of Article 3 says, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges both of the Supreme Court, Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. So, what does that mean? That means that it basically gave Congress the power to decide the organization of the Supreme Court and federal courts. The Constitution is completely silent on the composition of the Supreme Court and how many that makes up. And it has changed over time. When it was the first Judicial Act of 1789 established the court with 6 judges, that number was increased or decreased to 5 briefly during the last days of the Adams administration. That was then that was reversed back to 6 shortly thereafter. And then when they established the judiciary in 1789, they established what was called writing the circuit. So federal circuit courts corresponded to the number of judges, and each justice had to go to a circuit at least once a year. So there were 6 circuit courts, and they were basically the appeals courts, and they would actually physically have to go to each one. So the Supreme Court did meet together, but they also individually would go to each circuit to hear appeals cases. So the number of Supreme Court justices increased to 7 in 1807, 9 in 1837, and 10 in 1863. And again, part of that was because of writing the circuit. So because you had, as the country was expanding and it was getting larger, they established more seats on the Supreme Court, not because they wanted to keep the number on the Supreme Court relative to the population, but because of the size of the country as it was growing. And you were stretching the circuits more thin, and they're making it bigger and bigger, so they had to reorganize, add justices so you could add circuits, and so that it was become a little more manageable. But it was a very, very tough job to go to these circuit courts every year. And you were probably there half of the year. So you were away from Washington, D.C. half of the year in your circuit. Okay? So then the president of Andrew Johnson comes along, after Lincoln was assassinated. And he was a Democrat. And the reason that Lincoln picked him as a running mate was because he wanted to have a Democrat on the ticket to try to unify the country. Because remember, the North was dominated by the Republican Party, and the South was dominated by the Democratic Party at that time. So in 1866, because the Republicans had a supermajority, they didn't need Andrew Johnson. So any veto he would make, they could override. Congress passed an act that would lower the number of justices to 7 by attrition. So as somebody, if a justice died, or they retired, he couldn't appoint a new judge to replace them because the number was going to go down to 7. And then if it dropped below that, then he could appoint. So this was wholly to limit Johnson's power. 2 seats were removed as a result, getting it down to 8. Then the election of 1868 happens, and you get Ulysses S. Grant as president, and then they pass the Circuit Judges Act of 1869. And this established separate judges for each circuit, although writing the circuit remained a requirement, but it increased the number of times they had to go from 1 to 2 every 2 years. So instead of having the justices preside over each circuit, they would appoint a separate judge that would be the main judge, and then the justice of the corresponding circuit would only have to go every other year. So the appointed judge, the justice appointed to the circuit, or both could preside over cases if they were there. And this also established the number of justices back up to 9, where it has remained since. So since 1869, there have been 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Now, in 1891, the Judiciary Act of 1891 that established the U.S. Court of Appeals, which was later renamed Circuit Courts in 1948, and an eliminated circuit writing. So the justices no longer had to go out to the circuits anymore. This immediately lessened the workload of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rejoiced because they were getting tired of it. They didn't like that part at all. The circuit courts remained, but no longer had jurisdiction over appeals and acted as trial courts, essentially. And then in 1911, the Judicial Code of 1911 abolished the circuit courts and recodified all aspects of the U.S. Code related to the judiciary. So what does it look like today? So today we have 13 circuit courts and 94 district courts. And so the total number of Article III judges, which is basically how based on the federal judiciary, basically, has been 870 since 1990. So in other words, that means we have not changed the number of justices or judges in the federal judiciary since 1990. And that consists of 9 Supreme Court justices, 179 appellate judges, 673 district court judges, and 9 on the Court of International Trade. So there's vacancies that happen all the time. When you have 870 people are going to retire, people are going to die, and then it takes some time to appoint. But when Trump has appointed over 200 judges, so roughly 1/4 of the federal judiciary has been appointed by Donald Trump. And why is that? Because the Senate failed to confirm a lot of his nominees. And so when Trump took office, there was a high number of vacancies. So it wasn't just what he did to Merrick Garland in the Senate, what Mitch McConnell did to Merrick Garland. He also was doing the same thing for other federal judges, both appellate judges and district court judges. So now, since the number of judges has not increased in over 30 years, it's not hard to see why there's such a backlog in the court. Now, this commission is focused on the Supreme Court, but I think that there needs to be maybe a review of the court system in general, the whole entire federal judiciary. And I think that's really where Biden really would want to go. But such a review would take a long time, I would think, because obviously it would take a good deal of research and time to come up with a report. Now, again, this is a report. It's not recommendations. It's just a report that he's asking for. And so a lot of liberals have glommed on this and they're like, wait a minute, Biden's not planning on doing anything with this. They see the writing on the wall. So obviously Republicans are not happy with this. Some Democrats are furious with it as well because they see this as a bait and switch on behalf of Joe Biden, on the part of Joe Biden, I should say, because they see it as he's putting this out there so it does nothing on purpose. So he can say, I did something without actually having to do anything. That's how they see it. But yet Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, posted a video, and please forgive the corny music in the background, but here is what Marco Rubio posted on Twitter earlier this week.
President Roosevelt clearly had the right to send to the United States Senate and the United States Congress a proposal to pack the court.
And it's not about court packing. There's a number of other things.
But it was a bonehead idea. It was a terrible, terrible mistake to make.
And I will ask them to come back to me with recommendations as to how to reform the court system, because it's getting out of whack.
And it put in question, for an entire decade, the independence of the most significant body in this country, the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
So there it is. And they're trying to say, quit court packing, take your own advice. First of all, the now clips, because you could tell it was from, something he said when he was in the Senate compared to what he's saying now. Well, what he said now was actually from an interview on October 25th, 2020, while he was still running for president. And so he is doing exactly what he said he would do, which is have a report on the court system because it's out of whack. He said court system. He didn't say Supreme Court. Court system is the entire thing. Districts, appellates, Supreme Court, everything. Now, obviously, this commission he's put together is focused just on the Supreme Court, but it's reviewing a number of different things, not just quote-unquote court packing. Obviously, politically speaking, this would just lead to the same thing would happen over and over. So if the Republicans took it over, it'd go from 13 to 17. Then if the Democrats came back around and took over, they would go from 17 to 21, and it would just be a tit for tat. That's all it would be. And it's ridiculous, absurd, whatever you want to say. But I don't think, even if this bill somehow, some way passes through the House, passes through the Senate, gets to Joe Biden's desk, there is not a chance in hell he's going to sign this thing. And this is where they're going to start to see some fracturing. And this is more of what we expected from a Joe Biden, or at least we hoped for from a Joe Biden presidency, is that he was going to come up with ways to make it look like he was trying to implement a progressive agenda, but really didn't succeed at it. And it's not because he's geriatric and he doesn't get it, he's out of touch and blah, blah, blah. It's because he's playing, it's almost like he's playing aloof just so he can keep the progressive off his back because he doesn't believe in all that stuff. He doesn't believe in a $10 trillion infrastructure plan like AOC or somebody. So anyway, I don't think we are going to see us going from 9 to any number higher than that. I don't think it has to happen. I think that if you start increasing the number of justices, there's no other reason to do it other than you don't like the fact that Joe Biden or that Donald Trump got to pick so many justices. That's all this is. It's sour grapes. Now, you could argue that the Republicans started it by the moves that Mitch McConnell made and his tap dancing on why, when he didn't confirm Merrick Garland, but then he did put through Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, even though it was almost the exact same circumstance. The only thing that was different is the party of the president, the party of the Senate was the same. That was the only difference. And that's how he justified it. He basically said, yeah, we have control, so we're going to do it. And then, we have control not to do it, so we're not going to do it in 2016. It was a completely shameless answer. And he didn't try to make any excuses about it. It was completely political, 100%. It has nothing to do with qualifications of a justice had to do with ideology. 100%. So if Mitch McConnell can make decisions based on presidential appointments based purely on ideology, then why can't they put proposals together that are, by the way, completely constitutional? The Congress can decide that, and the president signs it, then it just becomes so. There's nothing that says they can't do this. But let's not pretend it's because, we need to get an impartial judiciary back. No, bull. You are just trying to play politics just like Mitch McConnell did. So don't try to take the high horse and make it sound like you're some kind of impartial arbiter of this stuff, and you're just trying to balance the court because you believe you need to be impartial. No, you want 7 liberal justices on the court. That's all you want. It has nothing to do with impartiality. Just see it for what it is. Stop pretending and stop treating us like we're stupid. So, anyway, that's going to do it for the Moderate Podcast this week. Thank you for joining us. Our website is themoderatepodcast.com. Please make sure you take our survey while you're there. I also have the links to all of our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. It's all there. And one of the cool things that Podbean does is it actually puts our podcast on YouTube. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or get our show that way too. But I prefer you not do it that way. If you already subscribed through a traditional podcast catcher, I'd rather you do it that way because it's better for my statistics. It makes it's more accurate for me to do it that way. Just throwing that out there. So anyway, so thank you for joining us, and until next week, everyone stay safe, and of course, keep it real.